I'm going to talk about the difference between experimental studies and observational studies. First, I want to talk about some terms. The explanatory variable, the predictor variable, or cause, is the characteristic purported to explain differences in the response variable. A treatment is a predictor variable that takes the form of a purposeful intervention. The response variable is an outcome or an effect, a characteristic of the subjects of the experiment, presumably in the treatment or predictor variable. And subjects in a statistical study are the people or elements from which the data is drawn. So now let's talk about the difference between the two kinds of studies. An experimental study investigates how the varying explanatory variable affects the response variable. This is where you actually introduce a cause and monitor its effect. A good example of how this is used in real life is drug trials. When a new medication is developed after they test on lab rats, which is also an experimental study, they will test on humans. These studies have two groups, the experimental group and the control group. The control group is given a placebo, whereas the experimental group is given the treatment. In an observational study, this is where we can't actually introduce that cause because it's unethical or impossible. So we have to go think a little bit outside the box, look a little harder for our subjects. For example, testing the effects of cocaine on humans would be very unethical to have an experimental group where you gave them cocaine and a control group where you didn't. What we would have to do in order to study the effects of cocaine on humans is we would have to get a bunch of cocaine users and monitor them versus non-users. So in an observational study, we observe the cause and monitor the effect. We cannot purposely introduce a cause because it is unethical or impossible. There are some more examples of experimental and observational studies in your textbook. I would like you to make sure you look over those. On page 25, is ecstasy toxic to your neurons? It explains why it's unethical to test ecstasy in an experimental manner. Secondhand smoking and illness in children, why it's unethical. Experimental studies, there is a good example on page 24 about newborn babies and a heartbeat. I would like you to make sure you look at those very closely. Okay. Hopefully that helps you understand the difference between experimental and observational.